Donald Trump prides himself on disruption, on headlines, on moments that feel historic the instant they happen. In Syria, those moments are now colliding with reality. Two American partners, the Syrian government and the Kurdish-led SDF, shooting at each other in Aleppo. At the same time, U.S. brokered talks between Syria and Israel are stalling. Again, if this unravels, it won't be a footnote. It could become Trump's first outright major foreign policy failure, not because he acted, but because he stopped at the act itself. Diplomacy is not a photograph. It is a system, and systems don't survive on headlines alone. If you want to understand how foreign policy actually collapses, not loudly but structurally, stay with me, because what is happening in Syria right now is not chaos. It is a pattern. And once you see that pattern, you cannot unsee it. What looks like sudden violence is actually the result of something much deeper. To understand why this matters, we need to be precise. This is not a story about intentions. It is a story about structure. The United States tried to manage Syria through shortcuts, personal envoys, small teams, fast deals. That worked for creating openings. It did not work for building outcomes. Today, Washington is backing two sides whose interests collide at the core. On one side, Damascus, a government seeking central control, territory, authority. On the other, the Syrian Democratic Forces, armed, organized, demanding autonomy, decentralization, identity. Both are U.S. partners. At the same time, the U.S. is trying to reshape Syria's relationship with Israel without resolving borders, without resolving security. These are not side issues. They are the state itself. And when diplomacy avoids institutions, mechanisms, and enforcement, pressure doesn't disappear. It accumulates. And accumulation always leads to rupture. To see why this rupture was inevitable, we have to go back. What you're watching now did not begin this year. It is the product of cycles. After the fall of the Assad regime in December 2024, Syria entered a vacuum. Power did not disappear. It fragmented into armed actors, local authorities, external patrons. The SDF emerged not just as a militia, but as an institution. Courts, security forces, control over oil fields and border crossings. Damascus never accepted that reality. It tolerated it temporarily. History tells us what comes next. Post-war states always face the same question: centralize fast or decentralize and negotiate. The U.S. tried to delay that choice by brokering understandings, not settlements. The March 2025 agreement reflected this: integration in principle. Details postponed. But postponement is not neutrality. It shifts power on the ground. And when timelines are absent, actors prepare for force. That is how frozen conflicts thaw. And that is why Syria's current crisis was not sudden, it was scheduled. The first rupture came quietly, then all at once. On the 6th of January, government forces moved into Kurdish-majority neighborhoods in Aleppo. They declared them closed military zones. This was not symbolism. It was execution. Within days, more than 150,000 people were displaced. Families ran north toward Afrin, toward SDF-controlled territory. A short ceasefire on the 8th of January allowed evacuations, withdrawals, but ceasefires without trust are pauses, not solutions. Since then, sporadic clashes have continued, each one smaller than a war, each one bigger than peace. This is what failed implementation looks like. The March 2025 agreement existed on paper, but on the ground, nothing had changed. No command structure, no political guarantees, no mechanism to resolve disputes. So each side prepared for the moment talks would fail. If you think this violence is accidental, you misunderstand power. When diplomacy stops at headlines, the battlefield resumes the conversation. And Aleppo was only the beginning. What sits beneath this violence is not anger, it is design. The U.S. approach relied on presence, not process. Every round of talks moved forward only when American envoys were physically in the room. Remove them, and the system collapsed. That tells you everything. There was no institutional spine, no agreed budget, no monitoring body, no dispute resolution mechanism. Damascus wanted absorption, individual fighters, central command. The SDF demanded cohesion, recognized identity, local authority. These positions are not cosmetic. They define the state. Add to this the unresolved struggle over oil fields, border crossings, and revenue streams, and you get a zero-sum equation. Headline diplomacy cannot solve zero-sum systems. It creates ambiguity. Ambiguity breeds mistrust. Mistrust produces force. This is why progress kept stalling, why meetings ended with statements, not outcomes, and why, without structure, even goodwill decays. What failed in Aleppo was not a negotiation, it was the illusion that one had ever truly begun. And now the second fault line is under pressure. The second escalation is quieter, but far more dangerous because it involves Israel. After the fall of the Assad regime, Israeli forces moved into the UN-monitored buffer zone south of the Golan Heights. They took positions on the Syrian side of Mount Hermon. Air operations intensified across Syria. This changed the geometry of risk. The U.S. tried to contain it through talks. 5 rounds. The latest in Paris, the 6th of January. Security arrangements, buffer zones, de-escalation mechanisms. A joint communication cell under U.S. oversight was announced. On paper, it looked like progress, but the core dispute remained untouched. Syria wants a binding timeline for Israeli withdrawal to pre-December 2024 positions. Israel wants guarantees, demilitarization, control, protection of minority communities. These demands do not overlap, so the talks managed risk but solved nothing. And when security diplomacy avoids borders, timelines, and verification, it doesn't stabilize conflict. It postpones it. Now the pressure is no longer abstract. It is being felt by ordinary Syrians. This is where the analysis stops being abstract and becomes personal, because when systems fail, you pay the price. If you live in Aleppo, you don't experience stalled negotiations, you experience checkpoints, shelling, displacement. You wake up not asking who controls diplomacy, but who controls the street. More than 150,000 people were forced to flee, not because a war was declared, but because no one finished the peace. That is the cruelty of incomplete diplomacy. It creates permanent uncertainty. No rules, no guarantees. If you are a parent, you don't care about communiques. You care about whether your child can sleep in the same home tomorrow. This is why headlines are not neutral. They raise expectations, then abandon them. And when trust collapses, people turn to the only thing left, force. If this analysis helps you see what power actually looks like on the ground, share it, because understanding systems is the first defense ordinary people have. What happens in Syria does not stay in Syria. Syria does not exist in isolation. Instability radiates from Aleppo to Turkey's border, to Europe's shores. When governance collapses, people move, irregular migration rises, smuggling networks reactivate, extremist groups find space. This is why Syria is not just a regional problem, it is a systemic one. For Europe, prolonged instability means more pressure on borders, higher counterterrorism risks, and deeper political fractures at home. For the region, it means every unresolved front becomes leverage. Israel's security moves reshape calculations in Lebanon and Iran in the Gulf. And when the U.S. relies on unilateral actions, shared rules erode. Norms matter only when they are enforced consistently. This is where the European Union enters the picture, not as a rival to Washington, but as a complement. Europe understands something the U.S. approach has neglected: Peace is not an event, it is administration. Budgets, monitoring, conditionality, and without those, power vacuums do not close, they multiply. What happens next depends on whether anyone is willing to think long term again. The future now branches, not emotionally, structurally. There are three possible paths. The first is stabilization. Slow, unimpressive. The US accepts that moments are not enough. The EU steps in to design and oversee implementation. Sanctions relief becomes conditional. Integration becomes sequenced, monitored, verified. It works not because trust exists, but because incentives are enforced. The second path is managed drift. Talks continue, statements are issued, violence stays limited, nothing collapses, nothing resolves. This is the most likely outcome and the most deceptive, because frozen conflicts don't stay frozen forever. The third path is failure. Headlines replace planning. Deadlines are avoided. Force becomes negotiation. Syria fragments further. External actors harden positions. History warns us what comes next. Libya, Iraq, quick fixes, long-term instability. The choice is not about optimism. It is about design. Systems drift toward entropy unless someone actively holds them together. And that brings us to the final question. What is happening in Syria is not a mystery, it is a lesson. Diplomacy built on moments creates applause, not stability. Donald Trump's Syria policy did not fail because it was bold. It failed because it stopped too soon. Headlines replaced institutions. Access replaced accountability. And when implementation disappears, violence fills the gap. This is why the European Union matters now, not as a moral actor, but as a systemic one. Europe knows how to do the unglamorous work: monitoring, conditionality, governance. Syria does not need another announcement. It needs administration. If this pattern feels familiar, it should. We've seen it before. In Libya, in Iraq, short-term thinking produced long-term chaos. If you want to understand where global politics is actually heading, beyond speeches and personalities, follow this channel. Share this analysis, because the future is not decided by moments, it is decided by systems.